Hi, my name's Anika from Carbon Corp, and welcome to part two of the Energy House workshop, how to stop losing heat from our homes. I'm here with Rachel, my colleague, who's going to do a bit of audience participation.
Hi everyone.
So what we're focusing on in this session is how do we stop losing heat from our homes? So this is a picture of a model energy house that we have in our office that we can't have today, but I've taken some pictures of it. And different parts of it have been insulated and other parts haven't, and we normally heat it up, and during the session we'll have a thermal imaging camera. So I did that here, and we can have a look at the house at this picture and see what we can see. So um, there are different colors here. You can see there's sort of a red and a kind of pale white color, and it goes right through the oranges and greens down to deep blue. So where you can see red is where the camera is picking up heat or a hotter temperature, and where you're seeing yellows and greens and down to blue sort of a colder temperature. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're kind of pretending we're looking at our real house using a thermal imaging camera and identifying what does it mean for areas to be hot, to see areas that are warmer and cooler. So in this house, which areas seem to be losing more heat?
So yeah, it looks like the walls on the left-hand side
Yeah,
losing heat downstairs mostly,
yeah,
and yeah, the two windows on the top floor, and then the window above the door.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And there are areas that are losing less heat.
Yeah, so there's a patch on the roof that's
Yeah,
not losing much heat, um, and then yeah, the walls at the front and around the windows on the left hand side as well aren't losing as much heat. And then
yeah,
there's a window on the top, um, the kind of dormer that's not um, losing as much either.
yeah, that's right. And so if I was showing you the Energy House in person, we could look inside this house and explain why, but I'll just do it for you here because we won't be able to. So up above so down at the bottom here, there isn't any insulation on this part of the wall. But as you get to the top of the left-hand wall, there's some floor insulation there. So it's stopping the heat getting into that loft insulation. So there's loft insulation, so it's stopping the heat getting into the loft. And again here, where you can see on the roof at the top, there's insulation on that point, but it stops as we get to the dormer, and there's no insulation there. So you can see that the heat is moving from there. And here we've sort of replicated double and single glazed window and triple through sort of smaller bits of plastic. So you can see that it does make a difference. Um, so we're going to just move on to just a little bit of theory and looking at how heat is lost. So there's two different types of heat loss that we're going to talk about here. One is conduction. So this is kind of going back to school and a bit of physics, conduction. So a good way to think about conduction, if you have a cup of tea and you put a metal spoon in the cup of tea, slowly the handle of the spoon will get hot. And that's because heat is conducting through that metal surface from the water through to your hand. So that's heat traveling through a solid material, and it goes through different materials at different speeds. Um, so heat, for an example, in a house, heat will travel through bricks quicker than it will travel through insulation, which is designed to conduct heat at a slower rate. So that's kind of why insulation does the job that it does. And um, the other type of heat loss is through convection or air movements. So if anyone's got a chimney, you know that hot air rises through that chimney and cold air replaces it through the lower parts of the house. Um, so when we're thinking about our homes, um, you know, gaps in our letterboxes or around our windows can let in colder air, and as hot air rises, it will go through either our loft hatches or gaps that we've got at the top of the building or open chimneys. If we've got open chimneys, it creates a sort of dragging motion as that hot air rises. And those two different types of ways heat is lost are important to think about when thinking about how to stop heat rising, stop losing heat. So to stop heat being lost, we need to improve the materials of the building so that heat travels through them less quickly, and also seal up the gaps so we don't lose hot air and we don't let cold air in. So how do we stop conduction, which is improving the materials? So we've got insulation, we've got improving windows, and we've also got maintenance, which possibly not many people think about maintenance as being a part of energy efficiency. So what kind of maintenance are we talking about? There's some pictures here, but Rachel, do you have an idea of how homes need to be maintained?
Yeah, I suppose inspired by some of these pictures, that yeah, damp proofing and kind of making sure that any damp is dealt with, or with before it gets too excessive. And I suppose things like just keeping up the like things that you mentioned earlier with drafts, making sure that if there's any like drafty areas, that you can kind of maintain those and keep them blocked up or properly ventilated.
Yeah. And there's also gutters. I know I've got a problem with a leaky gutter at the moment in my house, but that's important because, as you can see in the picture on the right, as your gutters get blocked up with leaves and things growing, it means more water pours down the side of your building, and it can create sort of water that goes inside your brickwork and building, and also create mold on the outside and inside possibly. On the left, there's a picture of someone repointing brickwork, which is another area where water can get in. There's also sort of missing roof tiles or cracked roof tiles, things like that, as well as you said, the damp proof course. So the reason why this is an energy efficiency issue is that there's a few different reasons. So one is, as you let water into your building, it's going to conduct heat faster as your sort of materials become more porous and create unhealthy living conditions for you through damp and mold. Also, if you're planning to insulate your building, or someone's planning to insulate your building, the building that you live in, if they don't maintain or they don't do the maintenance work first, and they just put external wall insulation, for example, onto a wall where there's a leaky gutter, or there's already the building materials quite damp, it's going to create problems and down the line with like even more damp issues in the home. So it's really important that maintenance is the first thing that's considered. And homes are well maintained to be energy efficient in themselves, and also to be able to add energy efficiency measures onto those homes. There are different ways we can insulate. So this is a picture from inside the Energy House, and that's a bit of floor insulation between the joists under a suspended timber floor. There are different ways that you can do floor insulation. You can use sort of soft insulation materials that are natural. You can also use insulate under concrete floors as well. There's lots of different options to insulate our floors. You can see this is that picture of the side of the house that we could see heat being lost through the sides there, but as it went up, there was less heat being lost at this loft area above because it had this layer of insulation here. So that's loft insulation. This is a picture of some room-in-roof insulation. So if you use the top of your house right underneath the roof, you can insulate between the joists and over them. But remember to do all the niggly bits around things like dormers, because otherwise the heat will just travel through those bits and they won't really mind that you've insulated this bit. They'll go out of another bit. So this is what I meant about making sure you have thought about the whole house, and how, in a way, you cover the whole house in a duvet. Think about every part of the house and how you can insulate every part. And then wall insulation. So you could either do it, from the inside, what they call internal wall insulation, here done with natural materials, wood fibre, so that the moisture inside the building and the outside can move rather than get trapped between the layers of the insulation and the brick. Or you could do it on the outside. This is sort of a model of external wall insulation, and we'll see some more pictures of external wall insulation in real life in a minute. So, do you have any experience of insulation being installed in your home and how that changed your home at all, Rachel? Or know anyone who might have had insulation at home?
Yeah, I remember it being installed back when I was younger, and like getting just the kind of very that kind of fiberglass insulation installed up in the loft, and that certainly made the loft much warmer at the time.
Yeah, I think lots of people have had, I think most people now have had loft insulation installed. And it does make a difference as long as people don't squash it. I know some people sometimes use their lofts as storage space and will sort of put boxes and materials down onto the insulation, which sort of stops it working as well as it could. So it's sort of important there to make sure those things are working well. I know some people, and it's been in the news a little bit, have seen issues. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the quality of these insulation works and how we can make sure that we don't get issues. So another question for you, Rachel. What can we see here? And is there anything you can see that seems like it's not done quite right for you? And if you get stuck, I can explain a little bit, but I just thought I'd ask you first, what do you think we're looking at?
So yeah, looking at the two doors, something that doesn't look quite right. I suppose that is there something about the windows in the doors on the left-hand side?
I think I'll give you a clue. So in both of these pictures, there's external wall insulation on the front of the house, on both walls, around the windows on the right hand side, and around the doors there's external wall insulation too. So I don't know if that helps in terms of thinking whether there might be issues.
Okay. Would the issue be that, as you mentioned before, that with doing the whole house, that the heat will still be leaving through the windows?
Through the windows, and also you can see there above the doors there's a stone lintel, sort of a bit decorative, and what they've done is just cut around that. So they've put the external wall insulation on, but just left it up here so that you can see the stone lintel still.
Right.
And there's also this brick wall in the middle between the homes that they've not insulated. And the insulation stops about 6 inches from the pavement. It doesn't go all the way down. So there's areas where they haven't insulated. And on the right hand side again, there's this sort of lintel, or I'm not sure it's called a lintel actually, but a sort of stone material between the windows that they haven't insulated. So all of those areas, all those gaps, I said before, heat will find a way through things. So heat will be coming out of that. In terms of if you think about conduction, that stone lintel above the doors will conduct heat. Heat will travel faster through that stone than it will through the walls that have been insulated. So that means that you'll still lose heat from that point. And also on the inside of so if you go inside the hallway of these homes, there'll be a cold patch above the window where the stone lintel is, and that's because heat's being lost faster through that point. And though you're likely to see, especially in the sort of spring and autumn when it's quite humid, that will be the areas where you'll get more condensation and mold issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's it's good to see it like that, because it's surprising how those kind of seemingly tiny details have such a big impact.
Yeah, exactly. There's There's also another problem on the right hand side where they've left this decorative sort of area underneath the gutters at the top, and they've put a cap on the insulation there. So if it really rains hard, it's likely that, and those caps are often held on with some silicone, and if it really rains hard, you're not it's not certain that the water won't go behind that cap, if especially as the seal tends to wear away over time, and that's going to create problems in terms of mold or sort of damp issues between the insulation and the brickwork. It would be better if the roof's extended slightly to protect the top of the insulation. So there's some of the common problems, unfortunately, we see when people do sort of some of this energy efficiency work. And so therefore it's really important to really think carefully about the design element, how to design these works and make sure they're installed well. What we were just describing there is this term called thermal bridging. Have you heard of that term before?
No, I haven't.
No. So this is, I'll explain what it means in a minute, but again, so this on the left-hand side is a picture of above a door inside someone's flat, and on the right-hand side is a thermal image of the same picture. And you can see that's an area of a big cold area above that door, because it's and so that is what we call a thermal bridge, because it's an area that allows sort of heat to travel through it faster. It's sort of insulated to a different level to the sort of material around it. The reason why thermal bridging is really important, basically thermal bridging means it's an area where heat travels at a different speed, as we've been talking about. So heat flows like a liquid, and when I first realized this, it was a real sort of clicking moment for me. So if you imagine a bucket which has got some holes in it, even though the holes are fairly small in that bucket compared to the whole surface area of the bucket, the water is still going to pour out fairly fast. So if you think that heat flows like liquid, it's the same with buildings. The gaps in the insulation, like the ones that we saw in those previous pictures, heat will flow out of those areas. So making the insulation work less effective, much less effective than it would have been if it had been done sort of more exactly, you know, with more care around those sort of details. So it's really important that a good design is done before a builder installs an insulation. Oh, yeah, so we've already talked about this, what we might see on the other side of these thermal bridges. Here's another example. So the picture on the left is a boiler flue that on this project they didn't extend, which is what they should have done. And then so they've just left a patch of insulation cut away. So on the other side of all of these spots, we're likely to see more condensation and mold because there'll be cold spots within the house. So moving on, how can we stop losing our hot air and letting cold air in from below? As we talked about earlier, we need to seal up the gaps. So remember we talked about how much we could lose through drafts. So in a typical detached home, 15% of our heat is lost through cracks and gaps, which is actually quite significant. That's sort of, I think, like a fifth or a sixth. I'm not so quick on my maths straight away. So chimneys are the worst culprits. So if anyone has an open chimney at home, you could probably do more for the energy efficiency of your house by simply blocking that up, either with something like a chimney sheep, which is a picture on the left, that kind of a plug almost that you can put up your chimney, or people use chimney balloons as well. And then you just need to remember to take that out before you light a fire, obviously. And you can see this picture on the right hand side, sort of the amount of heat that's being lost through a chimney. If you think the chimneys are made to draw air, think about all that hot air that you're constantly losing out of your home through an open chimney when you're not using it. Other areas that people often know about are windows. So you need to think about how when the opening of the window closes on the frame part, making sure it's well sealed. But as well as that, often windows aren't necessarily installed in an airtight way, so you can get gaps around the window frame and underneath the window sill. So if you're just have a look at home, often you'll see a little bit of mold sometimes around the edges of the window, and that's where it's colder, and it's colder because air's sort of moving through that area. I think you can see that on this picture here on the right hand side. There are the gaps around the opening, but then there's also gaps around the frame. Doors are an important one, so we've got our keyholes, our letterboxes, and also around the edges of a door. So there's lots of products out there, and we do run DIY draft proofing workshops, so you can check those out if you want to get into more detail with how to deal with windows and doors and cracks and gaps. A big one is around pipe work. So if anyone I've often noticed that often kitchens and bathrooms can often feel like the coldest places in a house. And that's because if you think about it, there's lots of pipe work going through from the inside to the outside of the house with the waste pipes going out. And often those pipes aren't sealed well. I actually noticed in my kitchen the other day, I sort of had a look and I can see daylight. Sometimes you can actually see daylight through around the pipes. And so that's all areas where quite a lot of cold air can come in as hot air rises in your home and pulls that air through the house. So there are things, you can use airtight seal like foam or mastic, or ask a sort of handy person to come and help you seal up those gaps. It can make quite a difference. There are lots more gaps, some of them quite big and that need specialists to deal with. So for example, especially in older homes, anyone with a suspended timber floor on the ground level is going to have lots of air coming through that space. And then gaps at the top. The loft hatch is a really important one. Often lots of people have their lofts insulated, but they haven't thought about sealing the hatch. So lots of air can get through that point and you can lose lots of heat that way. So yeah, there's lots of areas. A simple way of looking at this is if you go around your home and just have a feel for which parts of your house feel cold and warm, and have a sort of, on a particularly windy day, you could even sort of see if you can feel using the back of your hand whether you can feel whether there are any gaps. Obviously, if a wind's blowing in a particular direction, that's where you might feel gaps and you won't feel it on the other side of the house. So there's, a bit of caution there, but you could have a look and sort of have a consideration of where you think you might be losing your heat through gaps. So similar to insulation, where we talk about wanting to put a whole duvet around a house, sort of a constant insulation layer around the whole house. Air is the same thing. We often use this word air tightness. So what you're looking for is a continuous air tightness layer around the whole house. And that means thinking about things like the junction between sort of your ground floor and your first floor, and between the floor and roof void here, you can see where my mouse I'm pointing to. So how do you make sure that you have a constant air tightness layer through that point there? And similarly with insulation. So these are things when you're doing a whole house plan, the support of a designer to help you really consider how to do these elements, or if you've got a builder who knows how to do these things, you can get help to think it through in greater detail. So talking about that, who can do this work? So there are specialists out there who sort of understand in a lot of depth and detail energy efficient buildings and retrofit. There's also lots of local builders who might do your bathrooms or kitchens or do extensions, or small builders. And then, people are talking about lots of green jobs and having a new workforce of people that can do this kind of work. I mean, the other group I haven't actually included here, but I can see in the picture on the right is DIY. Some people do some of this work themselves. So in terms of who can do it out of those, it's not really about picking one of them. I think it's about all of those people working can do that work together. It's about as someone who lives in a home, or if anyone is sort of responsible for housing as a sort of landlord, sort of understanding the issue and sort of supporting those to work on it, to either have training or access consultancy support to be able to do the work well, or getting a good design done by an architect who understands these issues so that they can do this work well. And it's a real opportunity, because if you think about most of the homes in the UK will need to be retrofitted in the next 10, 20 years easily for us to meet our climate change targets. We're going to have to work with all the whole construction industry to revolutionize the way that we consider homes and how we work on homes. So it's a real opportunity for local builders as well as people coming into the area as a new workforce. So here's another quiz for you, Rachel. So this question is about thermal bridges, and I'd like you to pick as many of the following statements as you think are true. So I'll read through them. A. Thermal bridges are an area where there are gaps in the insulation that hot air can travel through more quickly. Thermal bridges are an area where there are gaps in the insulation that heat can conduct through more quickly. Thermal bridges are areas of different materials where heat travels more quickly through one than the other. And the final one, thermal bridges are areas where moisture can travel through a building. So if you have a think about which of those, you can pick more than one.
Okay, I think I'd pick A, B, and C.
Great. So it's actually about, so it's less about air traveling through with conduction. It's about heat traveling through materials rather than, or where, so when I say gaps in the insulations, that wasn't necessarily gaps for air, but you know, as we saw, there were parts of the wall that were insulated and parts are not. So it's less about hot air traveling through and more about heat conducting through different materials. Does that make sense? And again, it's not really about moisture traveling through a building. It's more about the sort of heat moving through, which has an impact on moisture, obviously, in the sort of dew point. But does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely that it's about the heat rather than the actual air itself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So thermal bridges are important because A, you would save more energy if there were fewer thermal bridges. B, they can create cold spots in the house where mold can grow. And C, they are necessary for ventilation. So pick as many of those as you think are true. And I'll go on to the next one.
I would pick A and B for that first one.
Great. And then the next one is, which of these statements are true? It's important to seal up every hole and gap in the house to improve its energy efficiency. Or B, we have to balance ventilating a house to keep it healthy and draft-proofing a house to keep it warm. Or C, it's always important to seal up air bricks.
I will pick I'd say that B is true for that one.
Yeah. Great. So yeah, you got all the answers as I expected. So thermal bridges are not really about air gaps again, so it's not about ventilation. It's more about saving energy through reducing how quickly the heat leaves your home, and making sure that you don't create these cold spots in a house where mold can grow. And again, while sealing up gaps and holes are important, it's really important to make sure that that's balanced with ventilation. And air bricks have got a really key place in making sure, so that's air bricks underneath your floor, for example. They keep the structure of your house well ventilated to stop damp issues. That's a different issue to sort of the warm area, the parts of the house that you keep warm, say your living room and kitchen, making sure it's well ventilated. So there's lots to learn, but you're doing really well. And next up, we're going to talk a bit more about ventilation, so we can learn about, air movement and healthy parts of air movement together then.